All right, so we will keep designing our scene. Next up is the sword that I've kind of seen her holding. I'll kind of want to design some form of chunky, big sword like we saw when we were looking for our Pinterest references. So that's what I will be doing. If you kind of envision something else, feel free to go ahead. But yeah, we will hop into Cinema 4D and get going with that. Okay, so since our blade will be the biggest part of our sword, it makes sense to start with that. So I'll go ahead and create a cube, which is roughly the kind of shape our blade will be in, so it makes sense to start with that. So I'll just create a cube, and I'll probably design it a bit outside of her space, yeah, so we can just focus on the sword entirely. And I'll go ahead and size the cube to somewhere where I think the blade will eventually end up. So somewhere around 31 centimeters in the X. It will obviously be very thin in the Z, and I want it to be pretty long, something like this. I just kind of place it right next to her just to kind of see the size of it. But yeah, I think that was good. So for this blade, we'll be using a slightly different technique than what we've been doing previously. So we will be doing a kind of modeling, which is called subdivision modeling. And it basically means that we're going to start from a very basic primitive shape, and then we'll be making it editable and adding a bunch of details and kind of mold and shape the geometry that we're working with manually instead of using deformers like we've been doing previously. And the reason for that is just because there's no deformer or anything that will create the type of blade shape that I will want to be creating. But yeah, as I said, we'll start out with a cube. And the first thing that we're going to do is actually make it editable. So I'll just press C for that to make it editable. And now, like before, if we hit the point mode here, we can see that we have all our vertices available. And since we will be working so much with the geometry of our cube here, it kind of makes sense to turn on the edges or the lines display option here, just so we can see everything as we're modeling it. So the first thing that we're going to do is add a edge right down in the middle here, just so we can add this pointy end of our sword. So to do that, we'll just select our cube. I'll right click and go down to loop path cut here, or you can just hit ML. And once you do that, you kind of get this line sweeping across the cube here. So now you can go ahead and add a bunch of edges to our model very easily. But we don't want to do that, so I'll just go ahead and undo that. So we just want to add this straight line right down the middle here. And if I hold shift, you can kind of see how it snaps to the different halves of our model here. So right down the middle here, I'll hold shift and click to add that. Perfect. And now we can actually hop out to our front view here. So I'm just scroll clicking between each window. We'll come out here, and usually you do the modeling in these kind of flat perspective windows just because it's easier to kind of shape things there. So I'll go ahead and select our brush selection tool, and I'll make sure that visible only is unchecked. So we make sure that we're selecting vertices on both sides of the object and not just in the front. And I'll hold Control and scroll drag to change the size of the brush. And I'll select the bottom vertex here, and I'll just drag it down probably around 15, maybe even 10 centimeters, something like that. And next up, we'll want to add another loop cut here. So I'll go ahead and hit M and L to select that tool. So what we're adding here is just this kind of cut that kind of goes through the blade before we get to the pointy end. So I'll just set it somewhere around here. And once I've done that, I'll come over to my brush selection tool. I'll select all of these vertices, and I'll hit the scale tool, and I'll scale them in the y-axis. So it kind of turns upside down like this. So somewhere around here, perhaps. And then I'll take my move tool and just drag it down somewhere around here. We just need to watch out so we're not dragging these vertices below these ones, because that will create some errors in our geometry. But something like this will work. And with that, we'll just go ahead and hop out to our perspective view just so we can see what we've been doing. So this is kind of how the model is looking currently. And obviously this is a very thick blade right now. So what we can do next is actually go ahead and select our brush tool again. We'll come to our front view, and I'll just make sure that I select all of these like outer vertices, something like that. So I don't want to have the middle one selected, because what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to hit the scale tool, and then I'll just scale these vertices so we're kind of creating our sharp edge here of our sword. So something like that. So not completely paper thin, but yeah, something like this will work. Great. And if we just kind of take a look at our shape as it is right now, we see the kind of base design that we're trying to go for. But this is like completely harsh geometry that doesn't have any roundings or any like nice smooth parts that will create some lovely highlights and stuff. This is just crude geometry. So to get these like nice roundings and smooth surfaces, we'll need to smooth the geometry, obviously. And you do that by adding a subdivision surface to your piece of geometry. And I'll just go ahead and do that so you can see what this does. But I'll have my cube selected. I'll hold Alt and click the subdivision surface object. And you can kind of see what this is doing. So if we just turn on our lines again, we can kind of see what this is doing to our model. And if I increase the geometry to like 3, you kind of see that it basically just starts to add a bunch of edges in between the edges that we already have there. The problem is that the subdivision surface doesn't know where we want these edges to be sharp and hard and where it's supposed to smooth it out. So we kind of need to tell the subdivision surface where we want it to be more of a hard edge and where not to have a hard edge. So the way you do that is basically add more edges to your model. So for example, we want these outside edges to be hard and we kind of want these corners to be hard as well. So what you do then is we select our loop path cut tool again, and we'll come out here to the end, and I'll just kind of hold shift so we snap to an even value here so we can know where to put this on the other side as well. So once I have the loop path cut tools activated, I can just drag this offset out, and then you can see what this does in our viewfinder. And I'll set it to 95%. And I'll do the exact same thing here. I'll place our loop path, and then I'll just drag it. So it's probably going to be 5 centimeters now here instead. So something like that. And now, if we activate our subdivision surface, we can see what kind of difference this will make to our model. And I'll just turn off our lines. So now you can kind of see that, okay, it understands now that this edge is supposed to be hard because we have those defining edges being placed out there. So we just need to keep doing that to the rest of our model. So I'll just go ahead and deactivate our subdivision surface, and I'll add one up here as well because we want this edge to be hard. This probably won't be visible because this will be covered by the guard, but we still want a straight shape coming out of here. And then we'll kind of come down here and we'll want the same thing for this pointy end as well. So with this one, I kind of want to place it so it's as close to the pointy end here as well. So I'll set it somewhere there, and we can go ahead and activate our subdivision surface just to see what that does. Great. But obviously you can still tell that since this edge is not defined yet, we still have this like weird butter knife sword going on here. So to fix that, obviously, we'll need to add our kind of pinching edges here as well. So I'll just make sure that we have our loop path attributes open here. So I'll set this to 95 too. And I'll do the same on the other side. I'll set this to 5%. Perfect. And we'll go ahead and see how this looks. Great. So now we're getting a lot closer. The only thing that we're missing now is that I kind of want this line to be defined as well. So to do that, we'll just go ahead and do what we've been doing. We'll add some more edges here to kind of show Cinema where to smooth and where not to smooth. So I'll just add another edge here. And instead of adding one down below here, since we have this like massive angle going down here, it will add this weird angle to our loop path since we have the next loop path all the way down here. So instead of adding one on the other side, I'll just add a second one on the top here. And that will kind of give us the same effect. So I'll just go ahead and activate this to see how it looks. And now we have a really nice looking smooth blade, but also with some very hard edges. And if we turn on lines again, we can kind of see that we don't really have an even distribution on the sizes of our faces here. And this is due to the fact that we don't have a lot of like supporting edges running along the blade here. So we have these edges here, and then we don't have the next supporting edges until up here. So we want to add a few along this surface, but we don't want them angled like this. So what I'll do is I'll create a loop path with the loop path tool selected, and I'll activate our brush selection. I'll make sure I'm selecting all of these. And to make them straight, we can just select our scale tool, and I'll scale it down while holding shift and the Y, and that will eliminate the difference in height in all these vertices, and now they're currently flat. So with the move tool, I just drag this down, and now after this, all of the edges from this point onwards to the top will be straight. So if I activate our loop path cut tool again, and I'll just come up here to the middle, hold shift, add one, and then we can actually hit the plus icon here to add a few more. So I'll just add like 4 of them so we have an even distribution along the long side of our blade here. And now if we activate our subdivision surface, you can now see that we have a nice even distribution of faces here. And I'll just go ahead and deactivate our lines here so we can see how this is looking. It's looking really good. I do think we can make the blade a bit thicker. So I'll just go ahead and activate our model tool here so we're not editing any vertices or faces. I'll activate my scale tool and I'll kind of just scale it out to maybe like 115% of where it was before. So something like this. So we're kind of getting a bit more of a chunky effect. So something like that. Maybe it got a bit too thick. Yeah, okay. And with that, we'll go ahead and create the guard and handle for our sword. So I'll start off first by just grouping this blade that we just made. So I'll hit Alt-G and I'll name this sword like that. And I'll go ahead and create another cube for my guard. So I'll just create this cube, drag it into my sword null, come down to coordinates and 0 the positions out. Scale it way down so it's somewhere along this size, so slightly broader than the blade. I'll drag it up a bit, just scale it down in the height. Same thing here, so something like this, I think. So it's just slightly bigger than our blade. I think that looks good. And obviously she needs somewhere to hold the sword, and a cylinder will do perfectly for that. So I'll just create a cylinder, drag it into our sword, 0 out the coordinates. We've done this 100 times now. Scale it down, and we'll just drag it up. I'll size it so it's something like this. I'll just make it slightly shorter. Kind of want her hand to fit into the handle because obviously she's got pretty big hands. So I'll just kind of rotate this just to make sure that the hand fits. Probably need to make it a bit bigger. It's at 21 right now, so I'll probably make it like 22 and I'll drag it up so it kind of sticks out a bit further. Great. And I want something to kind of top off the handle here. And I'm kind of seeing this cut off sphere shape here. So obviously we'll start creating that by making a sphere, drag it into our sword, 0 out the position, scale it down further. So it's maybe somewhere around 6 centimeters, something like that. And we haven't really upped our segments for any of these shapes, so I'll just go ahead and do that. I'll set this to 64, edit the rotation segments for our cylinder. We don't need too much on the height for this one, so something like this will do, I think. And we have used the melt deformer before to cut off some objects, so we'll do the exact same thing here. So I'll just come down to our deformers, go down to our melt, I'll drag it into our sphere, 0 out the coordinates of it, and I'll just set the strength to 0 like that. Great. And then we'll just drag down the sphere so it lies on top of the cylinder like that. Great. And like in my drawing, I had this like power stone or whatever at the center of our guard here. So I'll go ahead and create that so we can start by using a tube. I'll drag it in, 0 our coordinates, scale it down. We'll drag it up a bit. I'll rotate it 90 degrees. And I want it to be exactly in the center of our cube here. So I can actually drag it into our cube, make sure that it's 0 out in the Y position. So now it's right at the center. And we'll go ahead and just scale this down. So something like this. Scale down the outer edge. Something like that. And I'll just shorten this just a bit. Like that. And we'll want some more segments, so see if 32 is enough. I think so. We'll want some kind of like stone piece at the center here. And once we get into texturing and stuff, I'm kind of seeing that this shape will glow. So the, geometry and shape of it won't be too important, but I will use a capsule to kind of place through the entire guard here so it looks the same on both sides. So I'll come over to our primitives panel here, create a capsule, drag it into the tube, zero out all of the positions and rotation, scale it way down, something like that. Yeah. Don't need to do too much more to that. I'll just add a few more segments on our caps and our rotation. Something like that. Great. And compared to our sword here, all of these pieces of geometry looks very, very harsh and non-realistic when it's just pieces of geometry stuck together like this. So I kind of want to add some rounding to these objects. And there's a really quick and easy way of doing this using a bevel deformer. So it's basically just a deformer that bevels all of the objects that it's affecting. So we'll go ahead and create that and I'll kind of show you how it works. So we'll come into our deformers, come down to bevel right here at the bottom. I'll drag it into our sword and you kind of see what this does immediately. And I don't want it to affect our blade. I only want it to affect our guard here. So we'll go ahead and create a group for our guard where we can put the bevel deformer in. So I'll create the guard group at our tube. So then it's kind of at the center of everything here. And we'll rename this guard and we'll drag in our cylinder, our sphere, our bevel, and our cube like that. And I kind of want to scale this down. It's a bit big. I just want some slight rounding on it, something like this. And we can increase the subdivision as well. And I'll kind of set that at, I think 12. 12 is more than enough. Maybe even more rounding, so 0.33. Kind of want it to feel like this is a small object. So yeah, 0.5 is actually enough. Okay, great. And I think it would be really cool with some form of like bandage strapping along the handle here. So since we have this set up for her legs, we can just grab the cloner that we've been using for this. So I'll go ahead and fold out her leg symmetry. I'll grab this cloner here. I'll control drag it up to our guard. I'll put it into the cylinder object. And I'll come into coordinates and zero out the cloner coordinates so it lands at the right spot. And as you can tell, it's way too big, but if we have our cloner selected, we go into our scale tool, we can just scale this down quite a bit. Something like this. And since we're using this on such a small scale right now, it would make sense for the strappings to be a bit like longer, as if it was like actual pieces of cloth and not just tiny strings. So something like that. I'll come into our cloner object panel here and kind of start separating them a bit because they are a bit too tight, I think, but maybe somewhere around like -3. I'll add another one. And I think they're getting scaled down a bit too much. So I'll set these to 98.5 across the board like that. Perfect. And yeah, I think something like this will look really nice. I'm really happy with the look of our sword. There are a couple of details that I think can elevate this design even further. So I kind of drew these kind of like cuts going through the blade like this. And obviously you can go ahead and, edit all of our vertices that we just added and like add cuts and stuff. That will definitely complicate the modeling of this shape. So I'm going to show you a much easier approach that I like to do. And you can kind of get the same result without sacrificing too much time on modeling and that kind of stuff. So we're basically going to use ourselves of the same principle as we did for our shoes when we cut off the bottom of our sole here, but we won't be using the volume measure that we're using here because we want all of these features to still be sharp. But we're going to use ourselves of what's called a Boolean within 3D. And that allows you to use another shape to cut out another shape. So that's what we'll do. So I'll go ahead and create a cube first. And this will be the piece of geometry that we'll be using to cut out from the sword. So I'll create that. I'll scale it all the way down. And I'll drag it up to roughly a point where I think it will cut. And I'll rotate it 45 degrees. So it's diagonal. And I'll scale it down just a bit further, drag it out instead, something like this. Scale it down even further, like that. Okay, so what we need to do next is put our subdivision surface, which is our blade. I'll go ahead and call this blade just so we're a bit more organized. We'll need to put this within a Boolean object. So we'll come over here to this icon, we'll hold Alt, come down to Bool, let go, nothing will happen because we don't have anything to cut out the geometry with. So we'll go ahead and drag in our cube. And right now it is set as A subtract B. So we'll need to reverse the order of our blade in cube. So we'll drag our blade up to the top like that. And now you can kind of see what we're doing here. And I think the size of this cube is a bit too big. And if I were to go ahead and scale down using the coordinates here, we won't really like shrink it in this direction. So I'll actually make this editable because this object won't be visible anyways. So it doesn't matter if it loses some attributes. So hit C to make it editable. We'll change the object mode, turn on our scale tool. And instead of scaling it in the object axis, we'll set it to the world coordinate. So we scale it down in Y like this. And now I can actually turn on our bool while we are doing this. So now you can kind of dial it in to a point where you are happy. I kind of want some pretty cartoonish looking cuts. So something like that we'll do for now. And in my drawing, I did have 2 cuts, so we'll want to add that. And if I go ahead and duplicate this cube and drag it up, you'll kind of see that it will only use the 2 first objects in our bool. So what we need to do then is actually create an object called a connect object, and that will kind of allow us to connect all of the objects within the connect object. So it kind of interprets 2 cubes as one. So I'll come over here again. We'll hold Alt and we'll come down to the connect object here and we'll let go. Nothing will happen. We'll actually turn off the welding here because we don't need that. And once we put the cube in there, I'll just go ahead and duplicate a second one. And now we'll have some glitching going on. But as we separate them, you'll get to place your second cut here. And I want the second one to be a bit smaller. And I'll kind of zoom out just to kind of see how this is looking. Might scale them both down just a bit so they feel a bit sharper. So something like that. Yeah, looks like she's seen some battles with this one, which is what we want. Now, since we have been making this super nice subdivision modeling, actually modeling things for real, we're going ahead and ruining it with some cheap Boolean tricks that will create these harsh, ugly edges that we don't want. Luckily, there is a trick around that, so we can add some roundings to this procedurally, so we don't need to go in and, add a bunch of chamfers manually and stuff. So we'll actually be using a bevel deformer again for this. So I'll go ahead and fold in the connect object here, and I'll take our bevel deformer from the guard. I'll hold Control, drag it down to the bottom of the bool, and we'll let it go there. And right now, nothing will really happen. And that is because we need to tell the bool that everything within it right now is one single piece of geometry. So to do that, you'll just need to hit the checkbox here where it says create single object. Once we do that, now you can see some crazy stuff going on. So we'll need to do some tweaks to our bevel deformer to solve this. So I'll start by setting the subdivisions to 0 just for now. And then I'll set the offset or the size of the bevel to like 0.1 or something like that. So I think 0.1 will do it for now. And I'll add a couple of subdivisions, so like 3 of them. And that's starting to look a bit nicer, but we are getting some like weird kinks with the geometry here. And we are getting those because, using a Boolean is a quick and dirty way to cut something out. And it doesn't create the most perfect geometry. But if we are done with our design here and we're not supposed to, bake everything together and smooth it, this actually is completely fine to use. So to get rid of these like geometry kinks, we can actually go ahead and hit the Phong break rounding checkbox here. And that will kind of fix those issues that we had. So now it's looking much nicer than it did before. And if you just turn on and off the bevel here, you can kind of see the massive difference that this is doing. And this will do a lot once we actually start to render and you kind of catch some super nice highlights on these small edges once the sword is flipping around and stuff. So all of these small details are super important. So we're not just wasting time on tiny details here. This is actually important stuff. I think this cut is actually a bit too big. Might want to just drag it out a bit. Maybe drag this one out further. Okay, yeah, there we go. That feels better. Okay, we have a sick looking sword. So in the next lesson, we'll start to rig our character to prepare it for, posing and animation and that kind of stuff. So that's a bit more of a technical lesson, but it's super crucial that we kind of get those things down before we actually get into any of the animation and posting and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll see you over there.